Pay attention to this fly. Watch it land on the inside of an apartment window on Hirschfield Road in Spring, Texas. Because by the time this window had enough flies on it for a person outside to stop and notice, something catastrophic had already happened inside this apartment. And nobody, not a neighbor, not a family member, not a friend, had raised an alarm before the flies did. A blowfly can detect the scent of death from up to a mile away. Within 15 minutes of a person taking their last breath, one of these insects will have already found the body. It will lay its first eggs within 2 hours. By the time those eggs hatch into larvae, a forensic entomologist can read the stage of development like a clock, telling investigators not just that someone died, but precisely how long ago, to within a window of hours. The flies on that window at Winsong Village Apartments in Spring, Texas, on September 23, 2025, were not a nuisance. They were a distress signal, the most accurate alarm system in that building. And they had been trying to tell someone for days before anyone listened. This is the story of two women found dead in the same apartment, in separate beds, in separate rooms, with no signs of forced entry and no immediate signs of foul play. And the only thing left to raise the alarm is a fly on a window that a leasing manager finally notices on a Tuesday evening in September. Welcome to Last Witness. Subscribe right now and hit that bell. Every story on this channel exists around one truth. Something always sees what people miss. Tonight, that something has wings. And it was on that window long before anyone on the ground was paying attention.
Well, let's get right to a night full of breaking news, starting with two women found dead in the Winsong Village Apartments in Spring.
What was happening inside that apartment and how long it had been happening before anyone noticed is the part that nobody in the coverage sat with long enough. Let's establish where we are. Winsong Village Apartments sits in the 2900 block of Hirschfield Road in Spring, Texas, an unincorporated community in Harris County, just north of Houston. It is the kind of apartment complex that exists in the outer rings of every major American city. Multi-building, mid-density, functional rather than comfortable, housing a mix of working families, elderly residents, and people at various stages of economic precarity. Not a luxury building, not a neglected one either. The kind of place where the leasing office manages dozens of units, processes maintenance requests, and occasionally on a Tuesday evening in September, notices something wrong on the exterior of a ground floor window while doing routine rounds. That is exactly what happened. Around 6 p.m. on September 23, 2025, a leasing office employee at Winsong Village noticed two things about one particular apartment unit: a foul odor and a significant number of flies, not just a few strays near the window, but a large clustering, the kind that accumulates when a fly population has been building over days, drawn to a specific source behind the glass. Here is the detail that nobody in the initial coverage explained clearly enough. And it is the detail that makes this story about far more than two women and one apartment. The leasing office called law enforcement, not the neighbors, not a family member, not an emergency contact on a lease form. The leasing office doing routine property management was the mechanism that finally triggered a welfare check. Now ask yourself, how many days had passed before the flies made themselves visible enough from outside to prompt that call? Because here is what blowfly population science tells us about that window. A single female blowfly can lay between 150 and 200 eggs in a single batch. Those eggs hatch into larvae within 8 to 24 hours depending on temperature. In a Texas apartment in late September where interior temperatures without air conditioning can still reach the upper 70s, the development cycle is on the faster end. For a fly clustering of the magnitude described by Harris County PCT, 4 deputies at the scene, a large number of flies visible from outside the window, combined with an odor detectable in the hallway, the biological clock suggests the flies had been present and reproducing for a minimum of several days. Several days, minimum, which means two women lay dead in that apartment for several days before a fly on a window finally got someone to make a phone call. Harris County PCT, 4 constables deputies responded and gained entry. What they found inside has been described in official statements in the careful, measured language of law enforcement that is trying to convey severity without causing panic. 2 women, deceased, found in beds in separate rooms, one approximately 70 years old, the other approximately 50 years old. No signs of forced entry, no immediate signs of foul play. Captain Buddy Geen of the Harris County PCT, 4 constables' office stood in front of cameras that Tuesday night and said 6 words that should anchor this entire story. It's kind of a mystery as to how we got here. Let that phrase sit for a moment. Not "we have a suspect," not "this appears to be natural causes," not "we are ruling anything out." A mystery, from a law enforcement officer who had just walked out of an apartment where 2 women had been dead for an undetermined period and nobody had come looking for them. How do we get here? That is the question this video is going to follow all the way to the end. Now let's talk about the 2 women. Their identities were not released in initial reports. That is standard practice when next of kin have not been notified and identification has not been formally confirmed. What we know from official statements is this. One woman was approximately 70 years old. The other was approximately 50 years old. They lived in the same apartment unit. Investigators at the scene believe they may have been relatives, possibly mother and daughter, though this was not confirmed but could not immediately establish the nature of their relationship. Think about what that means. 2 women, 20 years apart in age, possibly related, found dead in separate beds, in separate rooms, in the same apartment. No forced entry, no signs of an altercation. The front door was intact, the windows were intact. The apartment, minus whatever was happening at that window with the flies, showed no external disturbance that would have attracted attention from outside. Whatever happened to these 2 women happened entirely within those 4 walls. And here is the first question that this story cannot answer and that nobody has answered publicly. Were they conscious of each other? Did they know the other was in distress? Did the 50-year-old know the 70-year-old had died? Did she die trying to get help? Did both deaths happen at the same time or separately? Were they awake when it started? Or did they slip away in their sleep without a moment of fear? These questions are not rhetorical. They are the questions that define the moral weight of this case. Because the difference between 2 people dying simultaneously and one person dying while the other was too incapacitated to call for help is not a forensic distinction. It is a human one. It is the difference between a tragedy and a horror. The flies know which one it was. The larvae development stages collected by investigators can establish with precision which body received the first colonization and which received it later. A gap of even a few hours between egg deposits on 2 separate remains in the same dwelling tells a story about sequence, about who went first and whether there was a window, however brief, when one woman was still alive and one was already gone. Whether that forensic entomology analysis was completed and whether its results are part of the ongoing investigation is not reflected in any public record available as of early 2026. But it is the science that was in that room when investigators arrived. It was embedded in every fly on every surface. It was the most precise timeline tool available. And the blowfly, the one on the window that started all of this, had already laid the groundwork for that analysis days before anyone came looking. Now here is the second thing that nobody talked about enough: carbon monoxide. Harris County firefighters were called to the scene alongside constables. They checked the apartment for carbon monoxide levels. The initial on-scene reporting did not confirm elevated readings, but investigators did not rule it out as a contributing factor in the early hours of the investigation. Carbon monoxide is a known silent killer, colorless, odorless, producing no sensory warning before it incapacitates. It kills without a struggle. It kills while its victims sleep. It kills 2 people in separate rooms simultaneously, with no evidence of foul play and no forced entry, and nothing to distinguish the scene from a natural death until a medical examiner runs the right tests. An apartment in North Harris County, old building stock, potentially aging HVAC equipment, a gas-fired heating system that may or may not have been properly serviced. 2 women dead in their beds with no signs of violence. Does that combination of facts make you think differently about what may have happened in that apartment? Because it should. And it should make you ask a question that goes far beyond this specific address on Hirschfield Road. How many apartment buildings in Harris County in Texas, in the United States, have aging HVAC systems, no functioning carbon monoxide detectors, and elderly residents living alone or in pairs who could be overcome without any ability to call for help? How many of those apartments currently have no active welfare check on any resident over 65? How many of those residents would not be found for days if something went wrong tonight? The answer is not a comfortable number. We do not know what killed these 2 women. The medical examiner's investigation was ongoing as of the available public record. Toxicology results, which are required to confirm carbon monoxide poisoning or any chemical cause of death, can take weeks to months to return in Harris County's current medical examiner caseload. The official cause of death for both women had not been publicly released as of early 2026. But the fly knows something. The fly was there first. And everything the fly saw, the sequence of colonization, the temperature gradients of the apartment, the degree of decomposition on each body, the distribution of biological activity across 2 separate rooms, is embedded in the forensic evidence that investigators collected the night they walked through that door. This is where forensic entomology becomes not just a scientific tool, but a witness. The blowflies at this scene were not incidental. They were not background detail. They were from the moment the first one found the first body in that apartment, a real-time biological record of exactly what happened and when. And here's the detail from Texas A&M AgriLife research that changes how you understand what was on that window. In September 2025, the same month these women were found, Texas A&M researchers published findings on a new technique using infrared light and machine learning to determine the sex of blowfly larvae and improve the accuracy of time of death estimates from insect evidence. The research was conducted in Texas. It is directly applicable to the conditions of this case: September temperatures in Harris County, indoor apartment environment, multiple day decomposition window. The flies on that window were not just an alarm. They were a data set, and the technology to read that data set with greater precision than ever before existed at the exact moment investigators needed it, at a university 40 miles from the scene. Whether that technology was applied to this investigation is not publicly known, but it should have been. Now let's talk about the neighbors. When deputies finished gaining access to the apartment and began processing the scene, investigators went door to door in the building complex, talking to residents. They were trying to establish two things: when these two women were last seen alive, and whether anyone had noticed anything, a sound, a smell, a change in routine before the flies made it unavoidable. Here is what the door-to-door told investigators that is not reflected clearly in the coverage. At least one neighbor, the account varies between reports that say leasing office and reports that initially said concerned neighbor before the constable's office clarified it was in fact the leasing office had noticed the flies. But the timeline between when the flies first appeared on that window and when the leasing office finally made the call is not publicly established. Was it the same day? Was it the second day? Had anyone in that building walked past that window in the 24 or 48 hours before the call and noticed something and decided it was not their problem? We do not know, and we may never know. But what we know is this: by the time Harris County deputies arrived at Windsong Village Apartments at approximately 6 p.m. on September 23, 2025, and entered that apartment unit, the flies had already told them the most important thing about the scene. These women had not just died. They had been dead long enough for a blowfly population to establish, grow, and become visible from outside a closed apartment window. That is not hours, that is days. Let's talk about what those days mean in human terms, not forensic terms, not investigative terms, human terms. Two women lived in that apartment. At some point in the days before September 23rd, one or both of them stopped responding to the world. Their phone stopped ringing out. Their door stopped opening. Their car, if they had one, stopped moving. Their lights went off or stayed on past the time they normally would. Their mail may have accumulated. Their trash may not have gone out. In a functioning community, one with active neighborhood connections, regular family contact, building management protocols for elderly residents, any one of those signals would have triggered a welfare check days earlier, before the flies, before the odor reached the hallway, before a leasing office employee doing routine rounds noticed something on a window at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. But these two women did not have that functioning community around them. Or if they did, it failed to activate for days. And here is the question that this specific case on Hirschfield Road in Spring, Texas, forces you to sit with. Who were they waiting for? Was there a family member who should have called that day, that weekend, and didn't? Was there a friend who thought about checking in and talked themselves out of it? Was there someone who had their number and assumed someone else was keeping tabs? Because here is the statistical reality that frames this story. In Harris County, the third most populous county in the United States, there are hundreds of thousands of adults over the age of 60 living in apartments and rental units, many of them without immediate family nearby, many of them without regular daily contact with another person. The gap between their daily lives and the moment when something goes wrong is a gap that no building management policy, no emergency contact form on a lease, and no neighbor check-in culture currently fills systematically. The flies fill it, eventually. That is not a sentence that should make anyone comfortable. Homicide detectives from the Harris County Sheriff's Office were on their way to the scene when the initial reports were filed. The investigation was handed off from PCT, 4 constable deputies, to HCSO Homicide for processing. The classification of the deaths as unusual circumstances, rather than immediately natural or immediately criminal, reflects the honest uncertainty of a scene that does not fit neatly into either category. No forced entry, no signs of foul play. 2 women, 2 rooms, several days. The Harris County Medical Examiner's Office had the final word on cause and manner of death, and that word, as of the publicly available record, had not been issued in final form by early 2026. The toxicology results were pending. The forensic entomology evidence was collected. The investigation was ongoing, which means the fly on the window is still, in the most literal investigative sense, the most complete witness available. It landed before anyone else arrived. It documented the scene before the investigators did. Its population told a story about duration that no camera and no neighbor's memory could match. And when the toxicology comes back, when the medical examiner finally determines whether this was carbon monoxide or a medical event, or something that law enforcement has not yet named publicly, the insect evidence will either confirm or complicate that finding. The fly does not pick sides. It does not have a conclusion to protect. It simply lands and lays and develops on its own schedule, and in doing so creates a biological record that human beings can read if they know how. Texas A&M researchers are making sure we read it better every year. Here is the final question this case leaves open, the one that will stay with you after the video ends. Two women, approximately 70 and 50 years old, possibly related, found in separate beds in separate rooms, dead for days in an apartment complex with neighbors on three sides. Was there a moment, a specific, identifiable moment, when one of those women could have been saved if someone had come sooner? Was there a window, even a small one, when the difference between a welfare check on Sunday and a welfare check on Tuesday was the difference between one death and two? The flies know. The larvae development stages, the colonization sequence, the biological clock embedded in every stage of decomposition in those two rooms. It all points to a timeline that the medical examiner's report will eventually make more specific. But the names of these two women have not been publicly released. Their story has been filed in the space between unusual circumstances and a pending toxicology result. The world moved on from Hirschfield Road in Spring, Texas, in about 72 hours of news coverage. The flies on that window were the last alarm system that worked. They were the last witnesses to whatever happened in those two rooms over however many days it took for someone to finally look at that glass and make a phone call. They did their job. Everything else that was supposed to catch these women before it came to that, the family contact protocols, the neighbor awareness, the building management welfare checks, the carbon monoxide detection infrastructure had already failed. And somewhere in another apartment, in another building, in another city tonight, another set of flies is beginning its work on another window, waiting for someone to look up. Subscribe to Last Witness right now. Hit the bell. Share this story with someone who has an elderly parent or relative living alone in an apartment, because the flies on this window were not unique to Hirschfield Road. They were a symptom of a system that has decided the most vulnerable residents of our apartment buildings are someone else's responsibility until they become nobody's responsibility at all. The last witness in that apartment had wings. It found these women before any person did, and it will find the next ones before any person does too, unless something changes. Stay watching. We will be back.